Hey everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. So excited that you've decided to join us. Today, we're talking about similar evidence, different applications, insight into health economic and regulatory literature reviews. Before we dive right into the topic, just let me cover some quick housekeeping items, a little bit of an overview, and then I'll hand it right over to our expert panelists. So you're all in listen-in mode. You don't have to worry about background noise, whatever is in the background for you. So no worry about that. We do have time for all of your questions. So we have time for dedicated live Q&A on the Zoom bar below where it says Q&A. You can click on there and then add your questions as they come up. And then we'll be happy to answer them, probably towards the end of the webinar, or if we see fit right at the point. And then if you want to watch a specific part of this webinar later again, or you want to share this webinar with your colleagues, you don't have to worry about that because this is being recorded and we will be sending out the recording to all of you. So no worries about, if you miss something here. Okay, and then just a sentence about Research Solutions, if you're not familiar with us yet. So Research Solutions, we empower researchers and research-intensive organizations, basically along the entire innovation process from discovering, acquiring, managing, and ultimately creating scientific articles and data. Our product family is powered by AI and NLP technology, but you'll see a little bit of a few of our products actually on this webinar today. Okay, with that, Greg, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks very much. And I am delighted to be here. Like many of you, I'm actually largely here to listen and learn. I'm not an HTA expert. I'm not a systematic literature review expert. I am somebody, my day job is I'm the director of the Health Protection Surveillance Centre in Ireland. I'm a medical doctor. I'm a public health doctor. And I am very often the sort of consumer of HTAs and systematic literature review and evidence. And so I'm very conscious of the value of this whole process, firstly. Secondly, I have been on the other side of this conversation where I have been doing systematic literature reviews, and I'm conscious of how difficult it can be without the right technology, because I've done that. And actually, what a pleasure it is when you use technology-enabled platforms like we're going to talk about today. It's a world apart. It's an absolute game changer. So I'm very, very excited to be in this conversation, and I'm delighted. I'm just going to ask Robert and Keith, and perhaps Robert first yourself, and then Keith, just to introduce yourselves a little bit about where you're from, where you're at, what's the lowdown, what's the word on the street, what it is that you're going to be talking about during today's session.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks, Greg and Julia, for the introduction. So I'm Robert, and I was a medical writer before, and I was a little bit frustrated about all those manual methods which we used before. So I'm the founder of Curedatis, one of the tools we are showing today. And yeah, so this is specifically for medical writers and also for the medical device companies who are doing clinical evaluation reports. So that is what we are presenting today here.
Thanks very much, Robert. Great to see you. And Keith, a little bit from yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Keith Kallmes. I'm the president and founder of Nested Knowledge. I actually have a similar backstory to Robert. I used to run a company that delivered systematic reviews, and their derivatives was extremely frustrated with the manual methods that we were using, and decided to build a technology to automate, augment, and improve those. So we focus primarily on HTA and HEOR functions within pharma and med device.
Thanks very much, Keith. And I think we're going to dive right in. And I think, Keith, it's over to yourself just to talk to us about HTAs, health technology assessments. And I'm actually going to straight away hand over to you because you know a lot more about this than I do. So, Keith, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. So lit reviews, evidence synthesis, it's foundational to scientific inquiry generally. So just kind of starting with that helps us understand why and how you're putting together these health tech assessments. Health tech assessments are really all about, number one, reimbursement. So actually getting on the list of drugs or devices that can be reimbursed for within a country. That can be a private insurer or a public insurer like the NHS. And then it's also about positioning yourself with optimal pricing within that. So a pharmaceutical company or device company will spend millions, sometimes billions of dollars getting that device to market. And even after regulatory clearance or regulatory approval, they have another hurdle to jump, which is this reimbursement. So what actually constitutes an HTA? Well, there are other things like modeling that come after your systematic literature review, but the systematic literature review comes first. Interestingly, and I think Robert will actually contrast this with the whole clinical and regulatory with the CER, these are highly variable in terms of the deliverables that you need, depending on the geography you're submitting to, right? So NICE and CADIP and AMCP don't actually have the same requirements for what your systematic literature review looks like when it goes into an HTA. And furthermore, you typically need 3 different literature reviews on the same product, a clinical one, an epidemiological one, an economic one, to make your case for patient benefit that becomes your case in reimbursement and pricing, right? So it's not a single review, it's actually 3, and it's not a single geography, it's actually anywhere you want to get reimbursed. Okay, so how about what happens in the actual process? When you're setting up your search, you need to set it up either, number 1, generally across these different geographies, or for each individual geography. And that's really why we built methodologies. If you needed to do a clinical, epidemiological, and economic search across every conceivable geography that you want to cover, you would end up doing dozens of searches and a lot of duplicative work. So if you do it within a platform that enables you to do bulk actions or act on a lot of literature all at once, you can filter to geography-specific literature or clinical, epidemiological, and economic-specific literature. Next slide, please. Okay, what does that mean? First, identify the geography of interest. Let's say you've done your broader literature review, have a whole set of records that you've brought in to your platform or an Excel spreadsheet. What you need to do is identify the endpoint. Okay, I want to show clinical benefit. I want to establish the cost to the society or to the individuals. That's epidemiological, like incidence prevalence. I'm sure you're familiar with those types of data. And then you need to translate benefit, that's the clinical benefit, cost, epidemiological cost, the burden of illness, into economic benefit. So probably the most popular way of doing this is with quality adjusted life years, but that's a difficult task. And typically what you end up doing once you complete these 3 different reviews is handing that over to a group of health economists who will model those outcomes. So a lot of what you're doing, not to make this even more complicated, a lot of what you're doing when you're doing systematic literature reviews for HTA is to get your modelers the inputs they need to come up with those dollars, right? So you have to establish it, and then you have to share it, and then it goes somewhere else to a different department. And then that gets all wrapped up into this health tech assessment, typically called a dossier. Now, what's interesting is, if you'll go to the next slide, please, the geography-specific requirements aren't just that you have patients from that geography. They actually demand very different things in their literature review, and they don't always overlap, even within the same country, right? So in England and Wales versus Scotland, they have different requirements for their systematic literature reviews, even within the same regulatory environment, which is, when you get CE mark, then you're still talking to different bodies about getting reimbursed. So really, the long and short of it is, if you have an intelligent database that allows you to tag studies based on their geography, based on the type of review it was, clinical, epidemiological, and economic, and remember they overlap, then you're going to have dozens of spreadsheets. And the real kicker here is you have to update these. You have to update these as new evidence comes out. It's not just okay, here you go, here's your reimbursement, off you go into the market. It's a dynamic process. So with that, I'll hand it over for contrast to Robert, who can talk about the clinical and regulatory aspect of getting on the market.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. So yeah, we did saw that the HTAs are very complex and dynamic, and for every region. So here in the clinical evaluation report, we are talking about the European Medical Device Regulation. So this is mandated by the European Union that we have for every device a clinical evaluation report in the medical device field. And there are several guidelines as well for the MDCG guidelines, which are helping to get some more information about the MDR and all those processes. And we have also for specifically for the clinical evaluation report, still the METAF 2.71 revision for the version 4 that we have that for the clinical evaluation report. But also there's a new ISO standard under development for the clinical evaluation. So that's something that's also in the making. So which will hopefully then get the METAF 2.7 out of the field. And what we have as well is, so every manufacturer who is selling medical devices in the European Union needs to comply with those medical device regulations. So there needs to be a clinical evaluation report for every device. And the purpose of this medical clinical evaluation is to show the safety and performance of the device. In the end, the content of a clinical evaluation is a digest of the technical documentation. So there's a technical part about the device, the clinical part, so the clinical evidence, but also a vigilance data for the device. So that's a very inhomogeneous type of paper then in a report in the end, which is but the similarity between the HTA is that we have also an objective, non-biased systematic search and review method. So that is described in the METAF guideline, which I just mentioned before. And we have as well an update frequency, which is based on a device risk class and the scale of innovation for the device. So a high-risk device will be updated, the clinical evaluation report, annually or even in a shorter period. But so that's is the main similarity between the HTA and the clinical evaluation report. And you see on the right-hand side in the top in the below right corner, so that is also the process we are using for the clinical evaluation report from search to update this report. Next slide, please, Julia. So what we have here is why are people, so we have a massive amount of data for clinical evidence if you are happy, if you have sufficient clinical data. And most people, according to an European Medical Writer Association survey, was that they are not even aware that there are systematic literature review tools out there, which we show in a minute. So what is the problem or shortcomings with spreadsheet, which we just introduced? So these are data inconsistencies, multiple conflicting versions. We have a limited data security and disconnected tools and data in the end. And this all leads to inefficient workflows, and you have a risk of incompliance in the end. Next slide, please. How can literature review software contribute to the literature review process for HTAs and also for the clinical evaluation report? So this is from an MWA survey, which I just mentioned. So you see the below the citation. And so the main contribution is the process improvement, time savings for data extraction and to set up a search and validate them, the traceability, so you have an audit trail, the error reduction, because manual processes are really error prone, and the all-in-one solution. So that is something which is also feeding then into the user friendliness here. Yeah. So these are the main advantages of literature review tools. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think
over to Greg.
Here's where things get exciting. A live demo, and just remind me, are we doing a live demo? Which product are we going to demo first? Are we going over to yourself, Keith, for nested knowledge?
We're doing Curedatis first.
Okay, so sorry.
Share my screen. All right, so we start with Curedatis, and you see it because can you see my screen right now? You can see that. Yeah. All right. So we just talked about the that clinical evaluation report are very streamlined. So that is hopefully what we also translated into Curedatis. It should be very intuitive and user friendly. So I just open a demo project here, and first of all, you see on the top, so that we are following the standard methodology from search, abstract screening, full text screening, and then we provide the user with a summary. So we search here. We want to search about this project is about burn wounds. Wounds and maybe skin, graft, or dressings. Oh. Put that in brackets. That's what we can do, and we'll filter them only for clinical trials because I did already a search before. So now we are directly searching in PubMed, so which is one of the major sources where people are searching. And then we select all and check the import if there are any duplicates inside, because we have an automatically deduplication here, so which is a benefit when you do those when you use those kind of systems. And because of the audit trail and transparency and reproducibility, so we have that that every single search query is also audited and stored here. So there's less amount of documentation in the end for the user, because the system will automatically document your searches, and you can always go back or add search alerts, like creating an alert, and you get those notification inside the system later, and you can just import them into your system, into Curedatis in this case. All right, but we are not just mandated by PubMed, so you can also import files from, if you use other search databases like Embase or Resolute AI, something like this, then you always feel free to import something from those databases. And if we move to the next phase, so we now have the abstract screening. So we start our abstract screening. And you see underlined, these are recommended picoterms in our case here, and the study design where I uploaded a dictionary, but the picoterms are AI driven, so they are recommended by the system. So this should give the user a faster approach to screening, so they can decide if they want to include, exclude, or they are not sure at this moment. And this will push then the text to full text screening later. So, and if a human confirms the annotation, then this will go to this summary later, which I will show you in the end, where we have this structured output then for your literature review. All right, if we include this one, for example, yeah, and everything is then really transparent in the end, because you get this output. You can also apply a, exclude this one, maybe that big population was not right, so everything is then documented, what you have done and why you excluded something or why you included something. If we move to the next stage, which is full text screening. So here, what we have here now is you want to have access to the full text, so we can just order the full text of those citations, which we just included, so order PDF. And here we integrate with Article Galaxy, which is our document delivery tool, and much more. So we can place the order. So there's no waiting time until you download everything from the publisher website. So, and this is copyright compliant, and everything is in one system. So we can update this one, and most of the items should be delivered in seconds. You see that? So that's here. And then we can start our full text screening. So we just start that. So we have a full annotation tool here inside Curedatis, where we can highlight the text and extract data as well. So I want to highlight something here, so then we can just highlight this, if I can find that. Find the highlighter, show why this switched. Highlight this one as a full text. And what we have else here, so is the data extraction form. So you can also extract the data in a template here that you can also review later in a summary. And then if you want to include this article, then the system will ask if you want to appraise the publication, which is also a workflow item from a clinical evaluation report. So we have our appraisal template from the IMDRF here, so which is then just clicking those buttons and answer those questions from your template. So this can be specified according to your process in the end, and will be stored later for an output file as well. So that's it. And then you do the fun stuff in the full text and move on to the summary, which is the output file. So now we have all the data, what you would like to have for writing up your systematic review. Then you might want to see which of them you have included or excluded the references, or all your PICO labels and other labels you might have screened in the end. Yeah? So that's here. So the population intervention comparison outcomes, and maybe the study design. And we have also the full Prisma flowchart, which you would also like to add to your clinical evaluation report, and the appraisal table, which I just showed, and a systematic output of your data, which you have been extracted. So that's streamlined like the clinical evaluation report, if you're happy, if you find sufficient clinical data. And yeah, so that's Curedatis, and over to you, Greg or Keith.
So oh, I'm not on mute. So I'm going to give a quick insight into my age. And before I'm going to ask Keith, you're going to do a live demo as well, if I understand correctly. Before I ask you to do that, I just want to highlight to both of you the dance of joy that I do in my heart when I see these platforms. And let me tell you why. So a little window into my age, I've just turned 50. So I was at medical school in the early 1990s, and there was no internet. So I remember trying to do a literature review where we would get the latest index of articles that were published on a CD-ROM. You'd plug that into a computer. You'd find papers that you think you wanted. You'd get the librarian to order them, which would come physically a week later. And then you'd sit with photocopies and a highlighter kind of going through the papers, trying to find anything of interest. I mean, if you think about where we've come from, where now it is, and I love the way you used that, Robert, when you started talking about getting to the full text, you said, then you do the fun part. I mean, it really and truly, the technology that's been built here and in terms of both platforms really just turns what was unbelievable drudgery into literally clickety click, 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 fun and games. And there's real science, informing policy, informing decisions, informing healthcare spending. So it's a whole new world. It's so exciting to see, especially for someone like myself that's kind of lived through the pain of a world that didn't have the stuff. So having said that, Keith, over to yourself. Nested Knowledge, it's a platform I'm familiar with. You introduced me to it years ago, and I've loved it ever since. So I'm excited to see you talking about it.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. And we continue to develop new features. So there might even be a new one that we haven't shown yet. So thanks, Robert. I'm going to dive into Nested Knowledge just to kind of signpost the features that I'm going to cover. Nested Knowledge really comes in two parts. It is a process for conducting a systematic literature review, meta-analysis, evidence synthesis project. And it's also a living web-based interactive dashboard environment for sharing your outputs. And if we have any academics on the call, there are actually journals that will embed your interactive web-based visual outputs as part of a living systematic view. Radiology, probably the most famous journal to do so. All of these are embeddable and link shareable. So with that out of the way, I'm going to dive into process. Start with configuring your project. You could do that with a protocol. You can also do that by configuring what your settings look like. I'm actually demoing from a published academic meta-analysis conducted on the efficacy of various stroke trials by some Harvard, Mayo, and Stanford physicians. But of course, it's generic to your evidence synthesis use case, like a health economic HTA dossier. Once you have your protocol and once you've configured your settings according to wanting to make your outputs public, choosing your screening configuration, configuring different AIs. Then you go to search. Each step of nested knowledge has an AI augmentation in the case of a systematic literature review, or an AI automation if you're looking to do more of like an AI targeted review. Within search, we have what we call RoboPico. This is very relevant to the new joint clinical assessment. If we have any health economists on the line, come in here, run RoboPico, and it will actually give you a list of commonly occurring topics based on a couple of search terminologies, and then let you build a Boolean query as a result. Simply by clicking finalize, that will then go out to your literature search module. You can run as many searches as you want. You can run them on PubMed, Directory of Open Access Journals, EuroPMC, clinicaltrials.gov. If I have any clinical development specialists, they know what it, or competitive intelligence folks, they know what a pain this is. You can also import from Ovid, Embase, Google Scholar, any of those other databases. You'll get automatic deduplication, which saves a lot of time for your search. And you can even see how those searches intersect. So you know that you're starting to get duplicative or unique results, and you should or shouldn't keep searching. Okay, next is screening. Very self-explanatory. It's in, it's out. If it's out, you give a one-click exclusion reason. You get the natural language processing Pico highlighting. Within nested knowledge, if you would like to use a robot as one of your screeners, you can, and you'll get accuracy, area under the curve, recall statistics for that robot. Now, very specifically, this robot trains on your decisions. So you have to train it with 50 screen records and 10 included records before you actually deploy the robot. Any disagreements between you and another human, if you're on dual screening, or you and the robot, will be adjudicated by an administrator, giving reasons. And this is also how we know how accurate the robot is. If you override the robot, that diminishes the robot's accuracy score. Next comes full text screening, and this is where we find a record that doesn't have a full text. We actually have an integration as well with Article Galaxy. If you have an Article Galaxy subscription, you can access those through the platform. We also have a site integration, so thank you, Research Solutions, for giving us 2 integrations to help researchers within the nested knowledge platform. And you do need a site or Article Galaxy subscription to use these. I should call out right now, it doesn't just come with a nested knowledge subscription, but you can use your site or Article Galaxy subscription within the nested knowledge platform with one click, and you will get some data for free from site, like citation data. Okay, the next step is really where nested knowledge is unique. It's within what we call tagging. Like I sort of signposted at the beginning, HTA submissions are very heterogeneous, and it takes a very flexible data structure to enable you to capture all the data with the precision you need, which is why we've taken the approach of these hierarchical taxonomies. These hierarchical taxonomies typically take the form of population, intervention, and outcome, and comparators, so PICO. And what it does is it goes from most specific on the bottom here to most general on the top. So mortality is a clinical outcome, is an outcome. Or let's say the artery of interest that it happened in is the location of the stroke, is the patient characteristic. The aspiration catheter used is a type of mechanical thrombectomy, is an intervention. Okay, so we're going from specific to general. And what this actually allows you to do is train an AI. It's going to help you find and abstract the relevant text segments within the platform. Okay, so then you just go to tagging, and you say, okay, I'm asking questions like, what were the interventions that were reported? And an AI will find and abstract that information for you. Again, uniquely from that ontology-based approach, it trains the AI so you don't have to, right? I remember, if you remember with screening, you needed to train the AI. Ontologies are unique in that they provide a lot of context information for AIs for this automated abstraction. If you want to, so this is for systematic review. If you want to do a meta-analysis, we also support that. And we even support dual extraction. So if you want to go all out and want to be the most scientific you conceivably can, all you have to do is, and unfortunately, this will only show you where it is in the text. It won't abstract every little value for you. You come in here, you abstract those values, and then we will actually run an automated frequentist network meta-analysis on top of that, which I will show you here. So I've moved from the creation environment to the consumption environment, auto-lit into synthesis. Synthesis is, like I said, link shareable, embeddable with your clients. You can do it very simply with like an iframe. I'm going to jump into the quantitative aspect because I just showed how to collect meta-analyses. Just click up here, you can get an embed iframe, and then you can deliver it to your client. So everything on synthesis is kind of like a PDF. If it were living interactive, it had frequentist network meta-analytical computing built into it. Okay, so this is the same project I showed you on the back end. This is how do you compare, or rather, how do different types of therapies for mechanical thrombectomy, thrombolysis, and accommodation compare with regards to clinical outcomes in the treatment of stroke patients. Okay, so we have our interventions, we have our outcomes, and you can actually see how well reported these different interventions and outcomes are in the literature in your data set. This is all the RCTs out there. We're going to look at neurological outcome, mortality, and hemorrhage. And if we just look comparing rates of good neurological outcome between mechanical thrombectomy patients and patients that were treated with thrombolytics, so devices versus drugs, we can see that there is a significant improvement over drugs when treated with devices. And this is actually what has become standard of care, and has become standard of care because of meta-analyses like these, which have taken the seminal trials, combined them, and shown a superior clinical benefit. Okay, well, what if you don't want to take the machine's word for it? What if you want to go down and granularly drill into what did the actual underlying paper say? You can do that. You can separate it out, click on any of these individual records. You get all of the data from the underlying studies. You get all of those qualitative tags that have been abstracted. So what patients were being studied, what was the study design, et cetera. You get a link out to PubMed. And then you can also know for audit purposes, like Robert was saying, auditability, data provenance, super important in any of these processes. You will also get that. If we have any biostatisticians on the call, they'll love the outlier detector, as I call it. And then finally, my favorite is the automated network meta-analytical odds ratio generator, say that 10 times fast, where you can actually compare the outcomes of two different therapies, and you get a force plot, you get a confidence interval around that force plot, sucra ranking, funnel plot, again, all with that auditability, all with the clicking in. If you're doing indirect treatment comparison, you get your network diagram, I-squared, anything you'd have in a traditional meta-analysis. Very quickly, the last outputs you get are interactive web-based visual dashboards that you can customize, and you can even download these, which is really important for that living updatability that is required for HTA submissions, or if you're publishing a living systematic review. And this sunburst diagram, which actually lets you very quickly narrow in on concepts of interest or call out insights for your customers while preserving that data provenance and giving them access to the underlying evidence. So thrombectomy patients unaffected by standard of care and medical therapy, that's a really, really profound finding because thrombolysis was standard of care for so long. It actually only came down to these 4 studies. But you can go in and look at those studies, look at the underlying data that was abstracted for them, and see that, yeah, the mortality rates weren't affected by the application of thrombolytic drugs. Okay, I've kind of just run through that platform really quickly, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time, so I'm going to turn it back over to Greg for discussion. Oh, you're muted, Greg.
Sorry. Here. So thanks very much, Keith. And it's super interesting, and I really enjoyed seeing. Firstly, I enjoyed seeing Robert's platform because I hadn't seen that before. And Keith, I'm familiar with nested knowledge, but so much has happened since I've last looked at it. Robo Pico, thing of beauty. I love it. So really excited to learn more about what it is that you guys are developing. Just a quick question that people watching this may be asking, and that is there an option for a free trial? So a person looking at this, they're interested. Is that an option? Is that something that you have as a facility? Maybe first, Robert.
Yeah, we have a free trial, so you can just contact at Curedatis or Research Solutions. So then we provide you with trial data. Yeah.
Brilliant.
We
Thanks
have
very
that,
much. And Keith?
Yes, everyone can create a free project. Go to our website, I put it in the chat, click sign up in the upper right-hand corner. I do encourage you to also reach out to me or to anyone on my team for a quick walkthrough or demo, just so we can understand what your exact endpoint is, academic systematic literature review, HTA submission, any of those, and get someone on a call to actually walk you through what that looks like.
Yeah. I have another question just while we're waiting for some questions to come in. Having seen how these platforms have evolved and developed and just matured very quickly, I'm curious about where you see the sort of next steps in this kind of technology. I mean, you've obviously been adopting kind of new opportunities to use in your case, Keith, AI. What are the next iterations of this? What should we be looking forward to? What does the future of all of this look like? I don't know if there's an easy answer to that question. It might be sort of proprietary secrets, but is there anything you can tell us? I'll start with yourself, Keith, and then maybe over to Robert.
That's a really good question, Greg. I think the most obvious one is continuing to leverage the ever improving AIs for augmenting researchers. That one's, we could have an entire webinar just on that, just on what are the new tools, how do they work, how can they be integrated, is it a responsible use of AI? That's a question I get from pretty much every customer who gets on a call with me. Is my boss going to be mad at me for using this? The generative piece, right now we don't do generative pieces. I would love to, but that also begs the question of, is it responsible? Something I want to see that's kind of unique to the HTA use case is all of these different bodies taking ownership of standards. Now, I'll be very specific by what I mean by that. They like that table I showed you, all the different requirements that all of these different bodies have. They're already talking in the joint clinical assessment about having a more CER-like approach, where it's all of the European Union would have similar standards, or at least try to harmonize their standards. But I think they could go well beyond that. I think that they could promulgate those standards in a digital format, right? Promulgate the standards in a digital format, which means that all of the people doing these reviews wouldn't have to go read the fine print in these HTA notes that were published by some random committee 5 years ago. Instead, they could go and download something, use those standards, and very quickly accomplish their systematic review, or plug it into an existing systematic review. That would be amazing. And that's not even a technological issue. It's more of like a coordination issue.
I agree. And that coordinating, I mean, we were just chatting in the chat a little earlier on, Keith, about the role of the WHO and the WHO products pre-qualification program. And it feels to me like there's something that can be done. It requires some sort of third-party supranational entity to kind of step in, coordinate. I'm guessing you would have a lot of nodding of heads around the table because everybody benefits.
That would be amazing. I think that the countries themselves would benefit. The patients in those countries would benefit because they'd get new therapies much faster. The pharmaceutical and device companies would benefit because they would get reimbursement faster, to be on the market faster. And obviously the general populace, right? That's the biggest one. I think I mentioned patients already, but your brother, sister, mother, father, grandmother, they get access to new novel therapies way faster. And this is something that I was watching an HTA panel, and obviously France and Germany and the US, they all are immediately the new target. Japan, right? They're always the new target for the new drugs and devices because they have money. And this woman from Bulgaria got up there and she's like, let's not forget about Bulgaria. Like we have people too, and these companies, I get it. They're trying to make money because they just spent $1 billion bringing this device to market, but why can't Bulgarian patients get it at the same time French patients do? That's a great question, right? If French authorities say, this is efficacious and this benefits patients, why can't we apply that within the rest of the EU? That would be my question.
Exactly. I mean, the evidence is the evidence. You know, it's not
the evidence is the evidence, and presumably French patients are not terribly different from Bulgarian patients, right? So let's take the evidence we use to submit to France, and then use that in reimbursement in smaller markets.
Yeah, absolutely. Robert, any future developments, aspirations, anything to look forward to? Any changes in the pipeline that you can give us a small window in on?
Yeah, I think also the data augmentation, so like Keith already told, I think there should be the transparency between the AI and the human. So that is something I think we already developed for the PICO screening, so that you can see what you have just the AI recommended, and then you as a user, as a human, needs to confirm that AI part. So that is something we always keep for regulatory stuff. So that's nothing about just having a ChatGPT question and then it's answered and without references. So that is also what we apply to Site AI, so that we have an assistant which are also referencing something then in the end. So you have a transparency between the output and what's the clinical evidence in the end. So that is, I think, where we should keep track of. And there was the recent Cochrane statement about AI, so that we should be very transparent what we are doing. So it should be described in the process, and where we apply AI, that's good, but we need to be transparent about that. I think that's there's a lot of value in it, and also structuring the data. So that's, I think, because nobody wants to read a dossier of 200 pages or 300 pages. So there should be more, I think, like the data should be structured and table and visualized. So that's, I think, the key for the future.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. And I really like having these conversations with people like yourselves, Robert and Keith, because you've got that deep insight into the way the world should be to get things going and over the line in a way that someone like myself wouldn't necessarily have. But as you say it makes so much sense. I understand that there are questions, and I'm just right now not able to see them. I see there's an attendee and Charlotte's hand is up. I wonder if she's able to speak, or if we need to see a question in the chat.
Yeah, Charlotte, if that hand raise is, sometimes it happens by mistake, but if you're, I'll allow you to talk, so feel free to, or add your question either in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'd be happy to answer that right now.
Okay, if she pops in with a question or types it in, that's great. We'll address that. Something that I might just, while we're talking about AI, and Keith and Robert, you guys, maybe both of you have got a view on this. The trust in AI, in terms of, Keith, you pointed out you've got, you can have an AI doing almost as your sort of artificial second reviewer. Is there any pushback against that, or is that kind of something that people are finding easy to get their heads around and adopt and have confidence in? Is it seen as an increasingly reliable way of having the way you identify and select data and extract papers, et cetera, et cetera? What's your experience been in terms of the receptiveness to that kind of new technology that people might not be that familiar with off the bat?
It's actually been very positive. I think it's because there's a crazy amount of data that these researchers have to comb through, and anything that helps them makes it go much faster. The second point I'll make is it's all about terminology, right? If you say, here's an AI systematic literature review, that to me is a contradiction in terms, right?
Okay.
If you just used an AI to summarize all the data, that's inherently unsystematic. So maybe a targeted literature review, or an AI literature review, right? I think we need to come up with these terminologies to make sure that we're communicating effectively. And by the way, your final dossier, you do 50 literature reviews before you get there, right? The first 49, I think it's very acceptable for those to be targeted or AI literature reviews. And then when it comes to the actual systematic literature review, we like to talk about augmentation, right? Where there's no actual there's no automation where it's taking the hand of the researcher off of the steering wheel. It's more, okay, we're going to suggest things. Like with RoboPico, we're suggesting terminology. With the robot screener, we're taking half of that, but there's still a human making every decision and quality controlling every decision. And then in the content abstraction, an AI is simply highlighting the text segment that it thinks is most relevant to your question. That's wrong like 20-30% of the time, right? AIs are not perfect. So if your deliverable is okay with 20-30% wrong, as it could be in a targeted or scoping project, great. We should not base reimbursement for actual people on those flawed AIs. So that's when I think automation needs to become augmentation.
Okay, interesting. There are two questions, and one, the first one's kind of a relatively short and easy. It's sort of like a yes or no. And Keith, you've answered it in the chat, but I'm just going to read out the question. Is dual review able to be performed in both tools? And Keith, you've said yes, dual review is it can be performed with nested knowledge. Robert, is that a feature within your platform?
There are workarounds, so that's not a clear yes, and it's not a clear no. But usually you do not have that for clinical evaluation reports. So basically that's done by one person. And there's also a question, should it be blinded for the HTA? Maybe that's a question from my side. Is it something that's in the guidelines, or is it also dependent on the region? So does it need to be blinded for double reviewers, Keith? Do you know that, or also Greg?
Yeah, it should be. They should not be able to see either. Well, they technically shouldn't even be able to see the full text, but they shouldn't be able to see the decision of the other person. And the robot, in the case of using the AI, does not train on the other person. It just trains on screener number one. So we have human screener, and then 50 records later, that one human can turn into a robot, but only trained on the one. So that's actually a really important point, Robert. That
sounds scary, yeah. If a robot turns into okay.
Okay, very good. Whenever I hear the word robot in my head, I've got this like picture of an android somewhere, sitting behind a keyboard, ready to take over the world. There's another question from Charlie Barr. What are the average range of times needed to do a systematic review for each major phase, days, weeks, months? And I'll ask each of you to kind of answer in your own time on that. I'm also guessing that the answer to that is it has changed in recent times dramatically, because not long ago it was extraordinarily long, and I think with the advent of this sort of technology, those timeframes have been compressed substantially. So if either of you want to just jump in with your thoughts on timeframes at each major phase of a review.
Yeah, I can start. So that depends really on the device, because sometimes you are happy to find any clinical data for your device. Maybe sometimes it's just mentioned in the method section where it's just stated that they used your device, so because it's just supporting your workflow. So then you are happy to find that, but there's no outcome data specifically for your device. So that is something you have, and sometimes you have a lot of data, and then it really depends on how many citations do you find for this specific outcomes and performance and safety data. So it's more about in the clinical evaluation report, it's maybe weeks you need. It's not months like in the academic regions or meta-analyses. So that's more in the weeks time frame for clinical evaluation reports. Yeah.
Right. And Keith, do you want to jump in with the answer that you put into the text decks? I think that's also quite useful.
Yeah, so AI review, I've done those in 45 minutes to an hour and a half. So that's just to preface, it has gotten a lot faster. In terms of a systematic literature review, probably less than a day for searching, days for screening and for content abstraction. When that could turn into weeks and months is if you're doing a meta-analysis. Now, remember, the meta-analytical piece is the least AI friendly, and it's also parsing a lot of data. So if it's a full-fledged systematic literature review and meta-analysis, you could be talking months, even with all this technology. If you're talking an AI review, 45 minutes, right? So that really runs the gamut. And I'll also second Robert, how big is this review, right? Is this on a disease where there's 10 publications and maybe 2 companies working on 2 therapies? Is this something in heart disease where every pharmaceutical company has a therapy? They're all running several clinical trials with many, many endpoints, and you have tens of thousands of potential people you need to wade through.
Right. So it depends a lot on what it is that you're looking at. That process of meta-analysis where you're kind of extracting out the actual, bits and pieces of data one at a time, is that something that down the line you imagine would be done by AI, or is it so specific and so, I don't want to use the word fragile, but so important that actually having human eyes on it is necessary?
That's a hard question. It depends on what your endpoint is, really. It depends on what your deliverable is. It depends on, well, really, for the researchers in this call, it depends on what your client is comfortable with.
Right.
The client is going to be the one determining acceptability of that. What I would say is, why don't you start with an AI? Just start with it, right? Just send it. Disclose that you used AI. Say this is a preliminary output. Should I quality control this? Is this what you were looking for? If it's not, go back to the drawing board, come up with some new search terms, pull in a whole new set of records, run the AI on those, share those until you hit, yes, this is what my client is looking for.
Right.
And then once you have that, then you can go back and you can be more systematic about it.
Right. Yeah. And I think with time, people are becoming increasingly comfortable with AI in a way that might not have been the case,
6 months ago.
6 months ago.
I now get queries all the time. Not a single pharma company asked me about AI before 6 months ago, and now it's routine. So clearly people have become more comfortable.
Okay, just a follow-on question from Charlie Barr. What exactly do you mean by an AI review?
That's a great question, Charlie. What I mean by an AI review, and I can if you email me, I can show you live. Accepting the AI's recommendations. So those recommendations I showed you, you're still configuring your ontology. That's very important. You need an ontology to train the AI for effective abstraction. Once you build that, run the AI and just bulk accept, which is a feature for nested knowledge super users in Study Inspector, bulk accept the recommendations, and you'll actually get those interactive web-based visual outputs. That's what I call an AI review. We need acceptable terminology across the industry. Because I've seen people, when they email these to their clients, they call it a TLR, they call it a scoping review, they call it an AI review. I think we need to unify around terminology by what people mean that they used in AI to come up with the output. And I mean, there was another great question: how do you stay up to date with these things? ISPOR is my favorite way of staying up to date on different changing HTA requirements. Going to the conference is the best way to stay up to date on these different changing requirements across HTA bodies. I think it's up to the ISPORs and the ICERs of the world to kind of, and the WHO, honestly, would be a really good one too, to just say, hey, this is the terminology that we're all going to align across. But we need to be speaking the same language, right? And to come together on what's acceptable practice.
Yeah, totally.
And people should also look up the Cochrane statement about AI and the Prisma statements, because they also introduced clearly that if you have screened by AI, so you need to mention that, so that they were excluded by the AI. So that is also what we have updated recently.
Absolutely. So I'm just conscious of the time, and I don't see any new questions that have come in. So I might just sort of say, Robert and then Keith, do you have any kind of like final words, anything you want to just leave the audience with? Any interesting words of wisdom, pontifications, thoughts, suggestions, advice?
Yeah, I would everyone to encourage to go away from spreadsheets and use tools like nested knowledge and Curedatis. So that is my wish, to make them more aware of those tools. That was our aim today, and to show them the different use cases. So I'm happy to see more and more connected tools in the end, and so that is would be my wish today.
Completely agree. Absolutely, Robert. And Keith, final words from yourself.
I will second that. Please stop using spreadsheets. Whatever you do, there's great tools out there, not just the ones on this call. The other one that I would suggest is try one of these AIs for your next literature review. Do it. Like it will blow you away. Really. Like maybe you tried it a year ago, okay, and you weren't impressed, but they have gotten scarily good.
Nice.
Really. Like go run one. you will be impressed with the outputs. I'm blown away. I know a lot of very tech skeptical people who've been doing research for a couple decades who didn't want to have anything to do with it. And I said, okay, we're going to sit down and we're going to run through it. And they were blown away. So try them out.
Excellent. I'm definitely going to try. So I'm excited about that. It's been absolutely lovely connecting with all three of you. It's been super interesting. I've learned a lot. I always do when I have these conversations. I'm literally here as part of the audience, one of the people learning. So thank you very, very much for everything you've said. And I think that is it from ourselves. Julia, over to yourself.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. As Greg, Robert, and Keith already mentioned, if any questions come up, after the webinar, that sometimes happens, feel free to reach out to either of us individually. You'll find us via email or of course on LinkedIn, and we'd be happy to take it offline with you. Yeah, well, thanks you all for jumping on, and hope to see you on the next one.
Take care. Great day.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Julia. Thanks, Greg.